Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I've faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back to Pioneer Mindset. I'm really excited for this week's episode. It's going to be another guest episode. Excited to welcome back Zane Abner to the podcast from Tredas. And Zane's actually the first guest that we had on the podcast, but he's also the first reoccurring guest as well. Somebody that I find a lot of value in, especially when it comes to the marketing side of the operation. As we all know, that's where you can kind of make or break your operation. So there's a lot to learn there, a lot to dive into. And so as we get into this episode, we're going to be talking about some different things that we're at today in today's world, today's kind of seasonal windows and different things like that. But also, Zane, we had him back on episode number 30, back about September timeframe. So if you didn't listen to that one, go check that one out. You can kind of listen a little bit more and learn about some of Zane's background and some of the things that he's been through that really kind of accreditates him. And so check that one out. We're probably not going to spend a ton of time on that today. But as we kind of get into things here, welcome back, Zane, and I'll kind of let you have some opening comments here.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me back, Garrett. Enjoyed doing it the first time around and look forward to see what we can chat about today.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And really what this kind of stemmed from is Zane and I were talking back and forth earlier this week, updating some positions and kind of making some adjustments to some of our personal operation. And so kind of thinking through that process, the current state that we're in, or the current time frame, I should say, we're recording this end of March timeframe. And so there's a lot of things that have been established, as we know, a lot of known factors that really help us move forward and kind of make the best decisions possible. Some of those are going to be, spring crop insurance prices, crop insurance coverage levels for our own individual operations. So that's kind of been already set, as well as we probably have a pretty good idea on our county-based kind of elections, whether that be ARC County or PLC, kind of really what we're going to take there. But then really in addition to that is our crop plans. They're generally set in stone. We know kind of what we're going to do for intended acres. We really should have a pretty good idea on our cost of production or even break even at standpoint. And we'll kind of dive into each of these different areas. But as we know all of this information, it really just helps us to make better marketing decisions as we move forward. And so I wanted to basically get Zane's thoughts on some of these different things. And there's a lot that we could cover, really dive into different rabbit holes there. So we'll just kind of see where this conversation goes. But Zane, walk me through some of the different conversations you're maybe having with customers, similar to what we had. And with all of those different known factors, what are you seeing, or how are you kind of going about making different marketing decisions?
Yeah, so we're at a time right now where what we're doing is really asking a lot of questions, right? We've gotten through the spring crop insurance window. We've passed March 15th, which is your sales closing, for crop insurance standpoint. So understanding what kind of coverage our farmers are taking, multi-peril, hail and wind, are they taking ECO, SCO, and then, even into your program type elections, ARC County, PLC, and understanding what elections they took from that farm program standpoint and why. Generally speaking, most situations it appears that ARC County fits most farms better than PLC, unless there's some different nuances within some individual farms. But, within ARC County, their effective price up at 503 on corn. They pay at 86% of that is where your payment cutoff line is. So roughly 433 cash, which historically figure about a minus 12 basis. That puts us in that 445 futures area, which, the corn market is traded down to. So understanding what each individual has, even from that program standpoint, could affect, some of your marketing decisions. It could play into, again, 1-year layers of revenue protection. So again, kind of rewind to your crop insurance elections. What are you taking for a multi-peril percentage? did you take SEO or ECO? ECO, is that higher band of coverage, from at 95 to 86%. So you need a 5% drop in revenue for that to start kicking in. Okay. So understanding if that operation has that layer of revenue protection also within everything. And this it can be very, very individual based. There's definitely going to be people that are going to completely separate that from what they're going to do within their grain marketing. That's just going to be a completely separate thought, and we're not going to intertwine those two. And that is just fine. I think the main thing for everybody to have some clarity is there's really not a wrong or right answer of if you want to intertwine those things or not. It's really just having an understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, right? If you're making marketing decisions based upon some of your crop insurance elections and coverages or your farm program elections, why are you doing that? And so that way we don't fast forward 90 days and the market's a dollar higher, a dollar lower, and you're in a panic type situation because you never forward thought about decisions you were making in March or April and how that could affect or what your second steps are in that higher or lower market. So again, instead of trying to live in a day by day chaos, essentially, even if you plan to not have a plan, right? You choose not to do anything today, still having an understanding of why you did that allows you to make those secondary decisions a little more fundamentally, right? Unemotionally. So it's just always trying to have a good understanding of what your next card to play is going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. You definitely dove into a lot there. And I really liked everything that you said and really agree with everything. And at the end of the day, it comes down to why did you make those decisions? Okay. Like I said, there was a lot of known factors at this point. We know the different coverages we're taking, kind of where that lies for our farm specifically. Now, why did we choose that? And then as we move forward, what is the plan? Like you said, even if the plan is to not have a plan and to just do the best with what the market gives us, okay, well, that is a plan. So as we kind of get to moving forward, I'd say in our operation, the reason why I like to tie a lot of those things, because like you said, you don't have to tie your crop insurance to your marketing plan. But the reason that I do, and you can kind of speak for the different relationships that you see within your clients and customers, but I want to know what is my guarantee? What is my guarantee on a revenue basis, but also just from a marketing bushel standpoint? All right. So if we can want to try to take advantage of what the opportunities the market gives us, because there are going to be opportunities one way or another. So if I at least know what my guarantee is, I know how many bushels I can actually kind of market ahead of time. So that's kind of my thought process. Kind of tell me what you kind of see with different people that you work with. And I know it's probably all areas from one spectrum to the next. So I guess kind of take that away a little bit.
Yeah. So you made a very, very valid point of having a good understanding of what bushels you're guaranteed from your crop insurance product ahead of time. Especially if a person's completely dry land, no irrigation, you can get very hesitant about marketing bushels ahead of time because you can have a huge variation of final yield, right? But your crop insurance can guarantee you bushels whether you raise them or not. But I've ran into this before. Again, everybody's should be expense conscious, right, of what we're spending, what we're paying. Obviously, it affects your bottom line. So I've seen it where people have tried to save some money on their crop insurance by taking YP, yield protection, instead of RP. There's a big caveat there that a person needs to be aware of. If we don't take RP, you do not get that higher harvest price. It's a harvest price exclusion, essentially. It doesn't matter if we end up at $8 corn and you don't raise it and you've been a proactive marketer, you put yourself in a bad situation because if you don't raise the bushels and you don't have that insurance product to back up the bushels you didn't raise, then you had something physically sold or hedged, marketed in some way ahead of time, you're putting yourself in a tough situation. So again, having a full understanding of why you're doing what you're doing. Because I know sometimes, especially from a crop insurance standpoint, as an operator, you probably think about it at sales closing time when your, agent calls about what kind of coverage you want. And then assume you don't have any storms in the summer, you don't really think about it unless you're reporting acres or reporting production. And then all of a sudden, if you do have a storm, right, you're like, oh man, what kind of coverage did I take? What does it mean? What kind of payout do I expect? It's something I do feel like it's glazed over a fair amount, right? You go through the routine of it, really probably having a full and clear understanding of what you're taking and why, probably not a common thing on most operations. And so again, you don't ever want it to happen, but it can have like a one in decade year type situation. And if you happen to be in one of those goofy scenarios, coverages or a decision that you didn't quite fully understand could be pretty painful or costly. Education, I think, is probably a widely used term at times.
Yeah, for sure. And you make a good point. Now, the people that are listening to this are probably thinking, well, why are we talking about crop insurance again? We already talked about that on an earlier episode with a different agent. Well, at the end of the day, this all kind of comes down to the two mingling together. That's why the guests that I have on these episodes, I think that it all can kind of be intertwined. So, especially crop insurance and marketing, I think there's a lot of value in having the make sure that we fully know what our coverages are. And you kind of alluded to that because there's so many different exclusions and add-ons and all these other things that can really ultimately affect what is our true coverage, what are some different limitations to that coverage, and some things that we need to be really knowledgeable about. So I don't mean to be kind of repeating some of the things that we talked about to some extent in that earlier episode when we talked about crop insurance, but really this does tie back to, like I said, knowing what your coverage you have so that way you can make decisions as you move forward. So I kind of talked about from a bushel standpoint, being able to market ahead. But, when it comes to the different coverages that we take, I kind of took a little bit higher level to some extent. At the end of the day, that kind of comes with the cost. So taking this one step further is making sure that we take that added cost or that investment for that insurance and factor that into our cost of production, factor that into our break even. So that way, from that point on, even if that's going to increase my break even a little bit, we know what that number is. So that way we can try to take advantage of opportunities that might present themselves in the market. So that's just kind of my thought process. Don't know if you have any additional comments on that.
No, again, I think in all honesty, the way you think about it, I think is in a high level thought process in honestly like a mature and disciplined way. And that is a lot easier to operate within, right? If you know your information, again, know why you're taking it. It's just, we're always going to have chaos in our life, whether it's work, family, or whatever it is, right? And we're never going to be able to control it. But if you can limit some of that chaos to a degree, or at least have some understanding of some paths you're going to take if this or this happens, makes your life a heck of a lot easier.
Yes, it sure does. I guess as you were talking about chaos, I feel like if we look back in the last 3 weeks in the markets, it's been a lot of chaos, I'd say, if you can understand that, if you've been really keeping track of that. But as we go to the spring crop insurance prices, as we talked about before, are set. We're looking at corn is at a price of 470, soybeans are at a price of 1054. I mean, all things considered, we look at the pricing window that we had to set that was kind of in February. And I feel like we were pretty lucky in that a lot of the volatility happened after that price was set. And so kind of talk about that a little bit because I feel like we did get lucky with our corn price. We did get lucky that we didn't have a ton of volatility. So that really affects your crop insurance price. I don't mean to keep coming back to crop insurance, but at the end of the day, that ties back to this. So tell me what your thoughts are, some of that chaos, more or less, following the set of the spring prices.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. Turning the calendar over to 2025 in the year, January, February, March to this point, our highest prices that we've seen from a grain standpoint happened in February. So being able to get some prices set within some revenue structure, your crop insurance, it was lucky. We have better revenue situations in place than, what we would have if we were using the month of March average. So that's a little bit of a good feeling. And some of that being set at those levels has led to some of the discussions that you and I have had recently about making some adjustments within your marketing plan, depending on some of those layers of revenue that you have placed into your operation. Again, whether it be crop insurance or farm program type thoughts. But now that that market has made that adjustment after that, if those official prices have been set, now you start taking some of those next steps of, okay, we got that set. Path one, higher market, path two, lower market. What are our steps if we see those? And we've unfortunate or fortunate, the market has moved lower. Obviously, don't want to necessarily see lower prices. But again, if you are proactive and have a forward thought, you're kind of always in position to be in position. I know it sounds goofy, but again, you know what you can do either way. So now we're in a position that we have some type of actionable item to do with the market moving lower. It's not an actionable thing of panicking because the market's moved lower. We have some positive type transactions or transitions that we can make because of some of the forward thought process that we had 30, 60, 90 days ago.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of goes back to knowing what your next card that you're going to play is. Now, nobody wants the volatility that we have. Nobody wants up and down days. Volatility creates a lot of emotion. I feel like it's easy to get caught up and wrapped in that emotion. At the same time, when it comes to the markets, and we can kind of dive into this a little bit, but it really ultimately depends on what side you're on. Okay. So a down day could be a really profitable day for somebody. And it's hard to kind of think that way. And ultimately, we do want the prices to go up. We want to have high prices so we can sell our commodities, the thing that we produce at a higher price. But there's definitely opportunities in the volatility as well. And I think that's why it's easy to get caught up in that emotion, easy to get caught up in the chaos that might ensue or let your kind of stories play out. But as long as we know what your different options are, what your cards that you can play are, at least that helps take away some of that emotion, helps bring some logic back to the business. At the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do here is be profitable. And so the one thing I wanted to kind of go back to a little bit is looking at these prices, like I said, 470 on corn. That level I'm fairly happy with from a crop insurance standpoint. And I'd say right around break evens, at least for our operation, that's going to be really close. What have you kind of been seeing for different, I'd say high level growers that have had their break evens put together? Do you have a rough idea as to where that break even price is going to be at for different operations that are out there, specifically on corn in this instance?
Right. And of course, again, you have a wide range of numbers and how people put pencil to think, but I would say roughly 4.5 is a pretty generic number that catches a lot of people. That 4.5, assuming normal type yields, is manageable, right? And not a blockbuster type year, but that's kind of your tipping point. Assuming average type yields, I think is going to catch a lot of people at 4.5 type number.
Yeah. Great. That's the easy one to talk about here. When it comes to soybeans, 1054, not a very sexy, not very attractive number here, considering where a lot of our break even prices are at. What have you kind of seen for break evens? I'd say in most cases, it's probably over $11. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, and there's even a bigger variation, I think, on the soybean side from what I've seen. Some people almost choose not to figure it, I feel like, because again, it's almost sit down like not understanding if we can make money. It's more like, well, just how much are we going to lose? Unfortunately. Again, I know everybody's a little bit different, but 11 is going to catch a fair amount of it, even a touch higher. Again, depending on how high of a projected yield do you want to use. But assuming normal type yields, I mean, in the ballpark of 11 is pretty close. And again, from $11 cash number, I mean, we're $1.50 away from that being a reality for harvest delivery type bushels, roughly.
Yeah, for sure. So I think where I was kind of going with that thought process is you go back to kind of that yield exclusion or some of the different exclusions that you can take on crop insurance, basically where if we do get a rally and we get that higher fall prices, as long as you got the right add-ons there, so to speak, and you can talk more to that, but we're going to get the higher of the two. All right. So now when it comes to looking at corn, we got 470, and that's a somewhat profitable level. We talk about soybeans being under our break even right now for the spring price. Is it typical to see, maybe a little bit of a rally as we get into soybeans somewhere throughout the year to give us some opportunities to at least get close to our break evens? We're not at this point from a soybean standpoint, we're probably just managing our losses, which is not a very fun thing to do, but at the end of the day, it's a move. So what are your thoughts on soybeans as we kind of go throughout the year there?
Yeah, so probably this would elude or kind of tiptoe into the seasonal tendency of grains. When you look at soybeans, if you have to be very robotic about times of the year when you see some of your better prices, thinking for this coming year's crop, roughly April through August, would be your seasonal window if you're going to pre-harvest market some soybean bushels, which, as of today, we're still in March. So we're not even technically into that seasonal window quite yet. There's still a lot of projections out there. We do have that acreage report that comes out March 31st that will have new crop acres and stocks that comes out. But the generalization, and from our last, the USDA forum in February, talking a fair amount, fewer soybean acres and more on the corn side. So if you can, again, hopefully get into our seasonal window, some lower acres, see, and the funds right now are short soybeans on paper. If you can put those things together, again, you can definitely make an argument that we should see some stabilization from the soybean price and hopefully see something better down the road. Obviously, you got some weather variables and obviously a lot of political type things going on, obviously with your tariff type discussions.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we could definitely have almost a whole nother episode on political side of things. But, rather than getting into that, and that also kind of goes back to the emotion and the chaos, right? And so I don't want to keep bringing that up. But at the end of the day, that can control, if you're not careful, some of the different moves that you're trying to make. If you start making emotional decisions or based off of what you think the market's going to do, and that's a really hard game to play, and that can be really expensive. You can definitely be taken to the school of hard knocks on that one. But you kind of segue into maybe our next area of topic here would be seasonal windows and looking at some different time frames because we don't know what the prices are going to do. We don't know what political side of things is, how that's going to affect things. All right. But if we can look at seasonal histories and kind of go back on that and try to do the best we can, let's talk about that a little bit. You kind of talked about the soybean side. Maybe talk to the corn. Talked about how you see different seasonal windows and how to maybe work through pricing in those different intervals.
Yeah. So the corn, a little bit different on corn versus soybeans. That seasonal window starts a little bit earlier. We would call it roughly February 1st through the end of June as your 5 month window in there. And again, so you just think about growing stages to a degree. We get into late June, assuming there's no other outside variable that's abnormal. But if we don't have any kind of weather type issue or growing issue, then a lot of that risk premium is going to come out of the market. And statistically, once you hit the end of June, 76% of the time, the market just sells off into harvest. Now, over the last 5 years, we've actually put our harvest low in a little bit early, more like late August, early September. You used to call it harvest low right more first part of October, but we've actually been seeing that a little bit sooner recently, at least. So again, think about percent solds and some of that information. If you're a very robotic, seasonal type person, by the end of March, you'd have 40% of, again, this is probably an important term, but 40% of your goal. It doesn't necessarily mean that your goal is to have 100% of your estimated production sold by the end of that window, but you have some type of pre-established goal so you know what you're working towards. And so again, robotically, you'd have roughly 40% of that done by the end of March. And I believe as of at least Wednesday or yesterday, the seasonal average right now on these corn is about 462.
Okay. Okay. No, that's good to know kind of where that lies. Because obviously we're looking at the spring price of 470, but knowing where that seasonal average window is at. And I mean, at the end of the day, that is an average. So if you can maybe beat the average, well, then you're doing pretty good, I'd say. And so something to really keep in mind there as to maybe a benchmark as to where you're at within your operation. And then another thought that you kind of brought up, and this is really per operation specific, per individual specific, but when it comes to if you're trying to do any sort of forward marketing and trying to protect yourself that way, a percent sold, okay, is that on your guaranteed production or is that on your kind of your APH production? Because there's a big difference there. Are you kind of going off of last year's production? Is maybe a really good number, really bad number? There can be some pretty good variance there. I guess the way that I see things is, and like I said, it all comes back to you and your operation. But I like to be a little bit more conservative. So when we talk about our total production, I'm going to go off of kind of maybe those guaranteed bushels, knowing that, okay, if we have a good year, maybe throughout the year, we can adjust that or maybe make some later end sales, or maybe the top end would be gravy to some extent. Now, I know that's maybe not the best way to look at things, but how do you kind of see things? Because there is a bit of a difference there between, I'd say, like, is it your guaranteed production from an insurance standpoint versus like your normal APH kind of proven history production.
Yeah. And like you said, there's definitely a variation of how people want to look at that. Some people prefer to talk in terms of their estimated production, just as long as we have a good understanding of what that means to them. And we know that that's not necessarily guaranteed. But again, if we want to talk about bushels that are guaranteed, we kind of reflect off of that number, which is typically going to be probably 70 to 80% of what your APH yield is. So we can reference that type of number. And like you said, if a person has this pre-established goal ahead of time and we get later in the year and all of a sudden, and we decide that we do want to be more aggressive because of the weather situation or whatever variable that is, we just want to have a good understanding of if we're using a hedge account or if we're using physical contracts. If you're more of a physical contract type person, whether it's HTAs or cash sales or basis contracts or whatever it may be, that you're very careful of being super aggressive, proactive with those, right? Because again, at the end of the day, depending on that crop year for that elevator, that geographic location, you may have to physically deliver those bushels. So if it's in a situation where you don't raise it, market goes up, at least if your physical bushel quantity that you contracted is within what your crop insurance guarantees you, at least you're going to have the price change side of it protected. Again, you might have to go through the hassle, of course, of maybe a cancellation fee if they let you buy out, or you might have to find the bushels from somebody. So those are some of those risk type things that you have to understand within your marketing plan. And it's always just at least having a pretty clear idea of why you're choosing the tool that you're choosing. So you don't get to the back end and it's like you're already in a bad situation and you have a secondary bad situation because of the contract or whatever it may be, just so it's not a snowball type situation of negative events, because it, again, the emotional side can be overwhelming at times and definitely can feel like you're on an island too if there's not somebody reasonable right there that's kind of looking out for you as well.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of another little plug there. That's why it's nice to have a marketing advisor, kind of somebody to help you through that in different avenues there, different regards. And so you really mentioned something that I think I'd like to get into, spend just a few minutes talking about, because that right there is when you talk about whether it be hedge to arrives or basis contracts where you have to physically deliver. And there's always that, okay, are we going to actually raise a crop? What does that look like? So there's hesitation there. And I feel like that's maybe some of the reasons why people don't like to do forward contracting. And so as we talk about what have you seen from, maybe if you're new to using futures or options, what are some maybe reasons why people are not using these strategies? And how can we maybe overcome some of those fears to actually get started? I think that's maybe a little bit of a topic I'd like to dive into because just short little comment. I was at a meeting before this and talking to a grower, and he said usually people, if they're not using some sort of futures or marketing advisor, it's probably because they had a bad experience in the past. Or maybe they tried it, they didn't have success, and they got burned or something like that. And so tell me what your thoughts are on that and how can people kind of maybe overcome some of those fears and actually get started?
Oh, for sure. So there's a couple probably different paths you can go down to talk about why a person is or isn't using them. And so thinking about more on the route of people not using a hedge account or futures or options. One, basic education, or the thought of, my dad always did it this way and this is how we're going to do it. And it's just how we're going to do it. And I think the other side of it, again, leading off of education side is fear and misunderstanding as well. Because I think sometimes we get information just out in the public, and a lot of that information is coming from someone that isn't also fully educated on the tools. So you very, very easily get a lot of misinformation about that world, right, of futures and options and how it's utilized. Just like anything else. And it doesn't matter if it's school, fast food place you like to go to, there are humans involved. So sometimes people have a hard time separating the tool or the business from the people. And whenever there's people involved, there's free will, there's characters, there's morals that are involved, that there definitely can be people that ruin something for someone. Whatever that person did, again, they didn't explain something correctly. They're just not enjoyable, to talk to or be around. They don't sincerely have your best interest in mind. That could easily ruin a tool or a business or something that really the tool itself or the strategy or whatever it is solid and good and great. That person ruined it for you. And that is very, very possible. So I think we get a lot of fear spread and we just decide to not take it a step further and educate ourselves on it. Because you get a lot of third hand stories and information, again, not only in this world, but a lot of other different avenues. And then it just creates this instant negative connotation with something. And I think that prevents a lot of entry into this world. On the farm, we're constantly upgrading technology, right? Whether it be on your plant or your combine, whatever it is, grain drying system. But we have a lot of grain marketing that is exactly the same it was in 1980. Where again, you're sitting in a brand new updated combine, whatever type technology in it, but we're still selling our grain the exact same way that 3 generations ago did.
Yeah, and great comment on that because I feel like it brings up adds of things because you always got to play devil's advocate. If it's worked thus far, why change? You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's like I've got a hard time with that one because if your reason for not changing is just because we've always done it this way, I feel like that's a kind of a piss poor reason, in my opinion. And so, yes, I'm sure there's a lot of fear in the unknown. And you mentioned kind of the misunderstanding, miseducation. I think that's a lot of it too. And just from the outside looking in, it's hard to see other operations not take advantage of some of these different tools that are out there. And like I said, you've got to find the right person to work with, or you've got to make sure you're well educated yourself because this can burn you in a pretty negative way. But the marketing side of the operation can definitely make the business more profitable, or at least knowing at the end of the day kind of what your end goal is here. And kind of go back to the phrases, it's kind of hard to go broke making a profit. And so if we can at least know what our break evens are, try to market at profitable levels, that's to where I think this can really take your operation to the next level. Or maybe just even being completely honest, in a year like this year with soybeans, let's maybe protect our downside. You know what I mean? Or just risk protection. At the end of the day, that's what this is all about is risk protection. And that really just kind of depends on each individual person and operation as to maybe why they don't jump into this or why they're not using the strategies. But I just think there's a lot of value in, like I said, the marketing side of things. And that's why I'm going to probably continue to have you on these podcasts is because it's important to kind of hone in on this message and really hit it home and drive it home that this is something that needs to be focused on. So that's really good comments there. And I don't know if you got any additional things on that because I think it's a really important conversation to have.
Yeah, I think just don't be nervous about asking questions. I think it's probably the biggest. It goes back to a lot of the problems we run into as adults today are the same problems we had when we were 9 years old, right? I remember sitting in class and you don't want to sound dumb or feel dumb because you don't already know the answer, but we just got to be mature enough to just ask the questions. We get so much further in life. Again, we don't have to be arrogant enough to think that we know everything or act that way. We just got to be humble enough to ask those questions, and you'll be a lot further along just in whether it be financial, operational, or just in your life by, I'd say, from the humility side of it.
Yeah, for sure. One kind of phrase that comes to mind there on that same note is being humbly confident. And so being able to ask the questions, be able to have the confidence to ask the questions, but in a humble way, or knowing that you're just doing this, don't ask the questions to get better. And so I feel like that's one thing that's been nice about our relationship, just being completely honest, is we've been working together for about 3 years now. And there's times where I'm still like, okay, why are we doing this trade or why are we doing this three-way spread and just different things like that. And just asking the questions to make sure both of us are aware. And same for whoever you're working with to make sure, okay, why did you choose that crop insurance plan or why did you choose that coverage or are you going to be feeding cattle this year? Just knowing exactly what the plan is and asking the questions. So it's a very good point there as anything new that we want to do and work with. Very good point there.
5 years.
5 years it's been?
5 years.
Okay. Well, my bad. I stand corrected. I'm being humbled in this conversation. So I guess time flies when you're having fun, right?
That's funny. I was just going to say that.
But anyway, I mean, over that 5 years, overall, it's been a really positive experience. And I kind of go back to being one that it's definitely a shift in your operation. If you're being one that's, I don't want to say reactive, but if you're not doing forward sales, if you're not doing forward contracts to some extent, if you're just waiting till the crop is in the bin and then pricing it, in my eyes, I feel like that's being somewhat reactive. So if we're going to be switching from being reactive to proactive, I'd say the only thing I can recommend is have a little bit of grace in yourself. But okay, it might take some time. If you're switching from being, like I said, selling after the fact to making some future sales, whether it be futures options or hedged arrives or just sales in advance, just knowing that there's going to be a learning period there, knowing that depending on the market that you're in, whether it be an up market or down market, it could be kind of a hard learning curve. But at the end of the day, I'll go back to the statement of, it's hard to go broke when you're making a profit. And so when it comes to how we make these sales, how we go about, say, what levels that we're going to be selling at, in my eyes, this all comes down to knowing your break even, knowing your cost of production, knowing what you can actually produce this for, knowing that if we do have a good year when the corn is in the bin and everything's all said and done, the combine's parked, and we had a really good year, what does that ultimately do to our cost of production or our break even? So we know those different numbers and values. So that way we're not waiting for that extra 10 or 15 cents when maybe our true cost of production was less than that. All right. So just from a business standpoint, to really make the most of, say, the relationship, if you do start working with somebody, or just even doing this yourself. It's not entirely rocket science. It helps to have somebody that knows what they're doing. But just even if you're going to do this on your own, know what that number is, know your cost of production, know your break even. The another thing that I'm going to just kind of hit home there, and I know I talk about it a lot, but it's extremely important at the end of the day.
It helps you make more business decisions instead of emotional, right? If you're have no understanding of your cost of production, then you're purely thinking about prices. And if it's high or low or going to go up or going to go down, again, that's more emotional than thinking about your profit margin. I realize price drives profit margin, but you have to have an understanding of if you have profit margin or not, or where that level is. Then you start thinking about your sales more business like versus guessing or emotional type decisions.
Absolutely. So as we kind of get to wrapping this up a little bit, the last thing I want to ask you is, as we get into this is going to be released around the early April timeframe. As we get into planting, the planters start rolling, things get busy. We probably generally tend to forget about the markets unless we hear them on the radio. Oh, the corn was up 10 cents today, or something like that, or vice versa. Soybeans were down 20 cents. So we kind of tend to forget about some of those things as we get into the busy season. As we get this crop planted in and into the ground, as we move ahead, what are some things to think about, or what are you kind of thinking about as we move through these different seasonal windows as we get into 2025 crop year?
Yeah, so time that's released early April, again, we're going to be getting real close to plant time, of course. So you're going to be into your soybean seasonal first window, right? First month of that seasonal window. We're going to be into the 40 through 60 percentile of your corn seasonal window. Historically, your late April and June is your stronger corn seasonal window. So again, we get some volatility as planters roll, more weather type risk premium could be added to the market. So you start to have a little bit more volatility as you get a little bit further into the year, further into the spring. So just one, mentally be prepared for that. And the way you prepare for that is have an understanding of what your plan is. That way, again, whether it's a dollar higher or a dollar lower, you have a good understanding of what you're going to do. And you don't just have to wake up and react because, again, generally speaking, your reaction is going to be an emotional one. And it's going to be a little bit chaos type situation. So again, it starts today, right? It starts today thinking about what your plan is, what things look like for you over the next 30, 60, 90 days to prepare for those windows and to prepare for, the coming harvest and whether it be cash flow type situation, because you can even rewind to your old crop of what you got left, right? What are we looking at today? Probably needed a fair amount of cash, probably in March already from rents, fertilizer bills, things like that coming in. We're in a situation where we've picked up a lot of carry if you're an HTA or a hedge type person. And with the way the market's transacted, like on corn, you've picked up 30 cents or so just in carry from harvest till now. And we've seen a basis improve as well. So again, that'd be something that you need to keep an eye on remaining old crop here, again, from a hedge standpoint of looking at some type of basis number. And if you have open bushels, again, typically have some type of opportunity coming up in the next 30 to 90 days. So just be prepared to have a plan, again, plan for those type of transactions, understanding what you're doing and whether you wake up and the market's a dollar higher or a dollar lower.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I'll add to that is have the plan, but then make sure that you actually carry it out. And I do think that's where it's nice to have somebody to hold you accountable, whether it be a marketing advisor or somebody else within the business to say, hey, this was your plan, but why didn't you actually make these sales at that time? Or this is a great business plan, but if we don't carry it out, what good does it actually do? So that's the only comment I'll make on that as well.
Yeah, I've even heard, some people, and I've talked to some people about it. Again, make sure, again, put it on the fridge. You thought about this and here, this is your plan, put it on the fridge. And it's in the open. Your wife probably sees it, maybe some older kids, whatever it is. Somebody sees it. Maybe your dad comes over for lunch. A lot of times you guys eat in the kitchen. Everybody sees it. There's other people that, again, say, hey, that's my plan. And then you get some other people to help hold you accountable too.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we get to kind of rounding this out, obviously the few things that we discussed is going back to some of the different coverages you might have, because that's a big part of this, all of the crop insurance coverages you have. There are different add-ons you might have, knowing specifically what you have and why. That's a really good one. And facilitate that to, if you're working with the marketing advisor, facilitate that to them, or just make sure that you know it for yourself. That way you can, at the end of the day, get to creating that plan. So you can work on that plan. And the big thing here that I want to say is kind of a phrase is, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And so that's a really big one there to kind of summarize a lot of the things that we talked about. But the last thing here is when it comes to trying something new, if you've never done a lot of marketing in your operation, whether it be forward marketing or futures, options, whatever that actually looks like, is give yourself some grace. Try to make sure you find somebody good to work with, hold you accountable to that plan, but then really just be willing to try something different. Be willing to step into the uncomfortable because there's a lot of opportunities in there as well. And just have a little bit of grace with yourself. So, a lot of good things that we discussed today. Any closing comments before we kind of round this out today?
No, I wish everybody prosperous planting season and hope everything goes well and safe for everybody. And we're rounding that corner of, again, getting really busy on the farm. Shoot, baseball practice is going to start in a month and all kinds of things going on. Kids are going to be out of school before you know it.
Absolutely. It's going fast. Well, Zane, I appreciate you coming on here today. But before we close out, where can people find you? Where can they, reach out to you to see if they've got additional thoughts or ways that they could even potentially work with you or even your team?
Yeah, I'm located in Lindsay. We have an office just west of Lindsay. Our main location will be down in Lincoln. We have other different satellite offices in Nebraska, Alabama, and Iowa. Our main general phone number would be 402-858-7501 if you want to contact me directly. 402-260-7572. And if you're a social media type of person, we do have a social media presence on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And our website is just gotredas.com.
Yes, obviously that's a good one there too. Well, it was really good talking with you today. We will obviously attach a lot of that information on the show notes. So if you need to find it, it'll be there as well. But as for today's episode, that's all I got for now. And thanks, Zane, for talking with me today.
Yeah, no, appreciate the time again, Garrett.
All right. We'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram at Garrett Ruskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.